The
Where is
emergency
it? Tell
room
me now.
erupted
I
into
don't know.
chaos when
Please.
two armed military
Don't lie
police
to me.
officers slammed the
I'm not,
young
I
blonde
swear.
nurse face
Last
first
chance.
against the supply cabinet.
Easy now, don't do
Steel
it.
handcuffs clicked around her wrists, while doctors and patients stared in shock. "You're under arrest for theft of controlled military substances," the MP barked. The nurse, pale, exhausted, covered in coffee stains from another double shift, didn't resist. She just stared back with ice-cold eyes that had seen far worse than this humiliation. Then the ceiling lights flickered as rotor blades thundered overhead. A Black Hawk military helicopter descended onto the hospital rooftop. The side door burst open and 6 combat uniformed soldiers jumped out. Every single one of them snapped to attention and saluted the handcuffed woman being dragged through the lobby below. If you want to see how this story ends, how the nurse everyone underestimated brought down an entire criminal empire, stay with me until the very end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Pine Haven Memorial Hospital sat on the edge of Coldwater Springs, Nevada, a sun-bleached town where military convoys occasionally rolled through on their way to classified desert installations. The hospital itself was a sprawling concrete structure that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Its emergency department ran on caffeine, shortcuts, and the unspoken rule that nurses kept their heads down and their mouths shut. 28-year-old Lucia Bennett had worked there for 11 months, and in that time she'd become invisible. She was the kind of nurse nobody remembered. Thin, pale-skinned, with blonde hair usually pulled into a messy bun and dark circles under her eyes that never quite faded. She moved through the ER like a ghost, quietly restocking supplies, picking up extra shifts nobody wanted, never complaining when surgeons snapped at her or administrators dumped last-minute paperwork on her desk. To the doctors, she was forgettable. To the hospital board, she was expendable. To Graham Lockhatch, the hospital's vice president of operations and the man who actually ran Pine Haven Memorial, she was nothing.
Lack was the kind of executive who wore $1,500 suits to budget meetings and treated hospital staff like replaceable machinery. He had silver hair, sharp eyes, and a smile that never reached past his teeth. He controlled funding, hiring, firing, and every decision that mattered. The hospital administrator was just a figurehead. Locke held the real power, and he made sure everyone knew it. Lucia first noticed something wrong 3 months into her job. A veteran patient, mid-50s, leg amputation from an IED blast overseas, checked into the ER with infected surgical wounds. His name was in the system. His medical records were complete. He stayed for 2 days while they pumped him full of antibiotics and redressed his injuries. Then he vanished. Not discharged, not transferred, just gone. His chart disappeared from the system. His bed was stripped and reassigned within an hour. When Lucia asked the charge nurse about it, the woman looked at her like she'd just suggested burning down the building. "Drop it," the charge nurse said flatly. "We don't ask questions about Locke's patients." Lucia didn't push. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but she started paying attention. Over the next 2 months, she watched it happen again and again. Veterans came in through the ER, usually with chronic pain, infection, or post-surgical complications. They stayed a few days, then they disappeared from the records like they'd never existed. The medications vanished too. Restricted painkillers, military-grade antibiotics, sedatives that required federal approval. Shipments arrived, got logged into inventory, then evaporated overnight. Nobody talked about it. The pharmacy staff looked the other way, and Graham Locke's office always had the final signature on the transfer paperwork. Lucia kept her mouth shut and did her job. She couldn't prove anything. She had no authority, and accusing a hospital executive of running some kind of black market operation would destroy her career before she could finish the sentence. So she watched and waited, and tried not to think about the last time she'd seen something like this. The morning everything fell apart started like any other. Lucia clocked in at 6 a.m. for another 12-hour shift. The ER was already packed. Chest pain in Bay 2, possible overdose in Bay 4, a screaming toddler with a fever in the pediatric section. She moved through it mechanically, starting IVs, checking vitals, running labs, documenting everything in the system while doctors barked orders and families demanded answers she didn't have. By noon, she was running on stale coffee and adrenaline. That's when Dr. Marcus Hale cornered her near the medication storage. Hale was one of Pine Haven's senior ER physicians, late 40s, perpetually annoyed and convinced that nurses existed solely to make his life easier. He had a habit of blaming staff for his own mistakes and a particular talent for making Lucia feel 2 inches tall. "Bennett," he snapped, waving a tablet in her face. "Where the hell is the fentanyl I ordered for the patient in Bay 7? Lucia blinked. "I logged it an hour ago.
It should be in the Pyxis. Well, it's not. Then someone else already pulled it. Nobody pulled it. Hale interrupted. Because you didn't log it properly. Now I've got a patient in severe pain because you can't follow basic protocol. Lucia's jaw tightened. She'd logged it. She knew she had. But arguing with Hale was like arguing with a brick wall. It only made things worse. I'll check again, she said quietly. You do that. Hale turned and stalked off, muttering loud enough for the entire nurses' station to hear. Can't trust anyone to do their job anymore. Lucia walked to the medication storage and pulled up the system logs. The fentanyl she'd logged was gone. Not dispensed, not transferred, just erased from the inventory. She stared at the screen, her pulse starting to climb. Someone had wiped it. Before she could process what that meant, the charge nurse appeared beside her. Locke wants to see you now. Lucia's stomach dropped. Why? Didn't say. Just go. Graham Locke's office was on the 3rd floor, far away from the chaos of the emergency department. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, and the kind of cold corporate silence that made every word feel like it echoed. Locke sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. 2 hospital security guards stood near the door. Lucia's instinct screamed at her to turn around and walk out, but she didn't. Miss Bennett? Locke said smoothly. Thank you for coming. Please sit. Lucia stayed standing. What's this about? Locke's smile didn't waver. We've had some concerns raised about your handling of controlled substances. The air left her lungs.
What, specifically? Locke continued, pulling a file from his desk. Multiple discrepancies in medication logs. Fentanyl, morphine, ketamine, all restricted substances that you've had access to. Lucia's hands curled into fists. I logged everything correctly. If there are discrepancies, someone else altered the system. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Locke leaned back in his chair, studying her like a specimen under glass. We've also received reports that you've been accessing patient files without authorization, specifically veteran patients. Her blood went cold. He knew. He knew she'd been looking. I was doing my job, Lucia said carefully. Those were my assigned patients. Were they? Locke's voice was silk over steel. Because the timestamps suggest you accessed records for patients you never treated outside of your shift hours, almost like you were looking for something. Lucia didn't answer. Locke stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Here's what's going to happen, Miss Bennett. You are going to resign, effective immediately. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and in exchange, we won't report this to the state nursing board or pursue criminal charges. You're framing me. I'm offering you a way out. Locke's smile finally disappeared. Take it, or I'll make sure you never work in healthcare again. Lucia stared at him, her mind racing. She could fight this. She could report him, file a complaint, go to the police. But Locke had money, power, and an entire hospital administration backing him. She had nothing, no proof, no leverage, just her word against his, and her word had never been worth much. I need time to think, she said. You have until end of shift. Locke nodded to the security guards. Escort Miss Bennett back to the ER. Make sure she doesn't access any restricted areas. The guards moved toward her. Lucia turned and walked out before they could touch her. She made it back to the ER in a daze, her mind spinning through options she didn't have. She couldn't resign. She needed this job, but if she stayed, Locke would destroy her. The charge nurse avoided eye contact. Dr. Hale smirked when he saw her, and the other nurses whispered behind their hands. By 3 p.m., everyone knew the thief, the disgrace, the nurse who'd stolen drugs and betrayed patient trust. Lucia kept working because stopping would mean accepting defeat. She was restocking trauma supplies when the first explosion hit. The sound came from downtown, a deep, bone-shaking boom that rattled the hospital windows and set off car alarms in the parking lot. Lucia froze, gauze packets tumbling from her hands. Then the screaming started. Emergency dispatch lit up like a wildfire. Calls flooded in. Mass casualty event. Explosion at the Coldwater Springs Veterans Memorial Plaza during a charity fundraiser. Dozens injured. Unknown number of fatalities. All available units responding. The ER erupted into controlled chaos. Trauma bays emptied. Extra staff got called in. Doctors started barking orders while nurses scrambled to set up triage stations. And Lucia moved. She didn't think. She just moved. Years of training kicked in like muscle memory, clearing space, grabbing equipment, setting up IV stations, organizing supplies. She worked faster than the other nurses, more efficiently, anticipating what would be needed before anyone asked. The first ambulance arrived 6 minutes later. The back doors flew open and paramedics rushed out a gurney carrying a middle-aged man covered in blood and concrete dust. His right leg was mangled, bone visible through shredded tissue. He was screaming. "Traum 1," someone yelled. Nurses scattered. Lucia didn't. She grabbed the gurney, helped wheel it into the bay, and immediately started cutting away the man's clothes while a doctor assessed the damage. "Femoral arteries compromised," the doctor said, voice tight. "We need pressure now or he's going to bleed out." Lucia's hands were already moving. She grabbed gauze, packed the wound, and applied direct pressure with the kind of calm precision that came from doing this 100 times before. The doctor stared at her. "Where the hell did you learn that?" Lucia didn't answer. Another ambulance arrived, then another, then 3 more. The ER became a war zone.
Blood-soaked patients filled every available bed. Families screamed for help. Doctors shouted over each other. Nurses ran out of supplies and improvised. The air smelled like copper and smoke. And Lucia moved through it like she'd been born for this. She triaged a woman with glass embedded in her throat, stabilized a teenager with a collapsed lung, talked a panicking elderly man through a heart arrhythmia while simultaneously starting an IV on a burn victim. She didn't hesitate, didn't freeze, didn't break. Dr. Hale watched her work with something between confusion and disbelief. The charge nurse stopped giving her orders and just stayed out of her way. And when a transport team arrived with 2 critical patients and nobody knew where to put them, Lucia made the call. "Clear Bay 5 and 6, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Move the stable patients to hallway beds. These 2 need immediate surgical consult or they're not making it to the OR. A nurse blinked at her. "We can't just do it now." They did it. Lucia coordinated the transfer, prepped both patients, and had them ready for the surgical team within 4 minutes. That's when the military arrived. The first Humvee rolled up to the ambulance bay at 4:30 p.m., followed by 2 more. Uniformed soldiers poured out, moving with the kind of disciplined efficiency that didn't belong in a civilian hospital. A captain in full combat fatigues walked straight into the ER, scanning the chaos, his eyes locked onto Lucia. He stopped dead. "Captain Bennett?" The entire trauma bay went silent. Lucia looked up from the patient she was treating. Blood on her scrubs, hair falling out of its bun, exhaustion carved into her face. The soldier stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. "It's you," he said quietly. "Holy, it's actually you." Lucia straightened slowly, her hand still pressed against a patient's wound. "Sergeant Ramirez." The soldier Ramirez looked like he wanted to salute, but couldn't figure out if he was allowed to. "Ma'am, we had no idea you were here. We've got 3 critical inbound from the plaza. Possible exposure to chemical accelerates. We need your assessment."
Dr. Hale stepped forward, visibly irritated. "Excuse me, this is a civilian hospital. We don't take orders from—" "She outranks you," Ramirez said flatly, not even looking at him. Captain Bennett was a combat trauma surgeon with the 82nd Airborne Medical Battalion. If she says move, you move. Hale's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The charged nurse looked like someone had just rewritten reality in front of her eyes, and Lucia felt the weight of every eye in the room land on her. She took a breath. "Where are the patients?" "Inbound, 2 minutes. Get them to trauma 3 and 4. I want full decontamination protocol, burn kit standing by, and someone pull up the toxicology database. If they were exposed to accelerants, we need to know what we're dealing with before we start treatment." Ramirez nodded sharply. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and started barking orders to his team. Lucia went back to her patient, hand steady, expression unreadable. Behind her, the whispers started. "Captain, combat trauma surgeon, 82nd Airborne." Dr. Hale stood frozen, his face pale. And in his 3rd-floor office, Graham Lockhatch received a phone call that made his blood run cold. The military patients arrived in a convoy of armored vehicles. They were triaged, treated, and stabilized under Lucia's direction, while federal agents began cordoning off sections of the hospital. By 6 p.m., it was clear this wasn't just a bombing, it was an attack. And the target wasn't random. The Veterans Memorial Plaza fundraiser had been organized by a coalition of military advocacy groups. The guest list included high-ranking officers, decorated veterans, and federal investigators who'd been looking into medical supply trafficking in the Southwest. Someone had tried to kill them, and someone had failed, because Lucia Bennett had kept them alive. At 7 p.m., a man in a dark suit and federal credentials walked into the ER and asked to speak with her. His name was Agent Dawson, FBI. He didn't waste time on pleasantries.
"Captain Bennett," he said quietly, away from the crowd, "we need to talk about Pine Haven Memorial." Lucia's pulse spiked. "What about it?" "We've been investigating a black market pharmaceutical operation running through this facility, military-grade medications being stolen and resold. veterans being used as test subjects for experimental pain management protocols without consent. He paused. We believe the explosion today was an attempt to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. Lucia's hands went cold. We also believe, Dawson continued, that you've been gathering information on this operation for months and that someone inside this hospital just tried to silence you. Lucia stared at him. How do you know that? Because Graham Locke just tried to have you arrested for drug theft an hour before the bombing. Dawson's expression was grim. That's not a coincidence. Before Lucia could respond, shouting erupted from the hospital lobby. She turned and saw security guards dragging someone toward the exit. It was one of the veteran patients she'd treated weeks ago, the man who'd vanished from the system. He was screaming about experiments, about being held against his will, about medications that made him lose time. And standing in the center of the lobby, pale and furious, was Graham Lockitch. He saw Lucia. Their eyes met, and Lockitch smiled. Then the military police arrived, and everything exploded. 2 military police officers in full tactical gear pushed through the hospital's automatic doors with the kind of authority that made civilians step back instinctively. They weren't there to help with the bombing victims. They walked straight past the triage stations, past the blood-stained gurneys, past the nurses still scrambling to keep patients alive. They walked straight toward Lucia. Graham Locke moved to intercept them, his polished executive mask back in place. Gentlemen, this is a civilian medical facility. If you need to coordinate with the MP didn't even glance at him. Step aside, sir. Locke's jaw tightened. I'm the vice president of operations here. You can't just step aside, or I'll move you myself. The second MP's hand rested on his sidearm. Locke stepped aside. Agent Dawson was already moving, positioning himself between Lucia and the approaching soldiers, his FBI credentials held up like a shield.
Gentlemen, this woman is currently providing critical medical care to federal witnesses. Whatever you need can wait. To Captain Lucia Bennett, the lead MP asked, his eyes fixed on her. Lucia's hands were still buried in gauze and blood from the patient she'd been stabilizing. She looked up slowly, her face expressionless. That's me, ma'am. You need to come with us now. The entire ER went silent. Dr. Hale stood frozen near the medication cart, his earlier smugness replaced by visible confusion. The charged nurse had stopped pretending to work and was openly staring. Even the patients who were conscious enough to pay attention turned their heads. Dawson stepped forward. On what grounds? That's classified. The MP's tone didn't invite argument. Captain, are you coming voluntarily or do we need to escalate this? Lucia wiped her hands on a towel, her movements deliberate and calm. She could feel every eye in the room tracking her, could feel the weight of questions nobody was brave enough to ask out loud. She stepped toward the MPs. Lucia, don't, Dawson said quietly. You don't have to go with them, not without. It's fine, she said. It's not fine. They have no jurisdiction here. Lucia looked at him and something in her eyes made him stop talking. I know exactly what jurisdiction they have, Agent Dawson, and I know why they're here. She turned back to the lead MP. Let me finish stabilizing this patient. 2 minutes. The MP hesitated, then nodded once. Lucia returned to the trauma bay, secured the IV line she'd started, checked the patient's vitals one last time, and handed off instructions to a wide-eyed resident who looked like he'd forgotten how to speak. Then she stripped off her bloody gloves, tossed them in the biohazard bin, and walked back to the MPs. Let's go. They didn't handcuff her. They didn't need to. The lead MP gestured toward the exit, and Lucia walked between them like she'd done this 1,000 times before.
Behind her, the ER erupted into frantic whispers. Dr. Hale started toward them, then thought better of it. The charge nurse grabbed her phone, and Graham Locke watched from the administrative hallway with an expression that could have frozen fire. The MPs escorted Lucia through the lobby, past gawking families and shell-shocked civilians still covered in dust from the explosion. They pushed through the main entrance into the parking lot, where 3 black SUVs were parked in a perimeter formation. A 4th vehicle sat in the center, a command Humvee with military markings and reinforced plating. The rear door opened. A man in combat fatigue stepped out, and Lucia's stomach dropped. Colonel James Garrett. He was older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but the way he carried himself hadn't changed. Straight-backed, sharp-eyed, and radiating the kind of authority that made junior officers nervous just by existing. He'd been her commanding officer overseas. He was also the reason she'd left the military. Garrett stopped 3 feet away from her, hands clasped behind his back. Captain Bennett. Lucia's voice came out flat. I'm not active duty anymore, sir. You don't have authority over me. That's where you're wrong. Garrett pulled a folded document from his jacket and handed it to her.
As of 1400 hours today, you've been recalled to active service under Emergency Military Mobilization Protocol. Your commission is reinstated, effective immediately. Lucia stared at the paperwork like it was a live grenade. You can't do that. I just did. Garrett's expression was unreadable. The attack on the Veterans Memorial Plaza wasn't random, Captain.
It was a targeted strike against military personnel investigating a weapons-grade pharmaceutical trafficking operation. We have credible intelligence that this hospital is a central distribution hub. Then shut it down. You don't need me for that. We need someone on the inside who knows the facility, the staff, and the operational patterns. Garrett's voice dropped. We need someone the perpetrators already underestimated. Lucia's jaw tightened. Find someone else. There is no one else. Garrett stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. 3 months ago, you started flagging irregularities in patient records and medication shipments. You documented everything. You kept copies. You built a case even though you had no authority and no support. He paused. You did exactly what a good officer would do. I'm not an officer anymore. Then why did you keep looking? Garrett's eyes locked onto hers. Why didn't you just walk away? Lucia didn't answer. Because she couldn't. She tried to walk away from the military 2 years ago. Tried to leave behind the carnage and the nightmares and the weight of decisions that still haunted her at 3 a.m. She told herself she was done, that she'd served her time, that she didn't owe anyone anything. But then she'd seen veterans disappearing from hospital records, seen medications vanishing into black market pipelines, seen the same kind of corruption she'd fought overseas, bleeding into the place she was supposed to feel safe, and she hadn't been able to look away. Garrett saw the answer in her silence. You have 48 hours to assist in this operation. After that, you're free to return to civilian life with full honors and a clean record. He glanced back toward the hospital. Or you can walk away right now, and we'll handle this without you. But if we do, Graham Lokach and everyone working with him will disappear into a legal black hole, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have stopped it. Lucia's hands curled into fists. You're manipulating me. I'm giving you a choice. That's not a choice. Garrett's expression softened just slightly. No, it's not. Lucia looked past him at the hospital, the building where she'd been humiliated, accused, and nearly destroyed. The place where people like Lokach operated with impunity, because nobody had the power or the courage to stop them. She looked back at Garrett.
What do you need me to do? 30 minutes later, Lucia was sitting in a secure briefing room inside a mobile command unit parked 2 blocks from Pine Haven Memorial. The walls were covered with surveillance photos, organizational charts, and financial records. 3 federal agents sat across from her: Dawson from the FBI, a DEA investigator named Torres, and a woman from Military Criminal Investigative Service who introduced herself as Agent Kim. Garrett stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. Grimlock has been under federal investigation for 8 months, Dawson began, pulling up a digital file on the screen. We initially suspected him of Medicare fraud and prescription drug diversion, but the deeper we dug, the worse it got. The screen filled with shipping manifests, pharmaceutical invoices, and encrypted communications. Locke's been running a black market medical network, Torres continued. He sources restricted medications through military supply chains, then redistributes them to unlicensed clinics, foreign buyers, and private research facilities. But that's not the worst part. Agent Kim leaned forward. He's also been using veteran patients as test subjects. Experimental pain management drugs, untested surgical techniques, chemical sedation protocols that violate every bioethics regulation on the books. Lucia's blood went cold. How many patients? We've confirmed at least 37 over the past 2 years, Kim said. Most of them were flagged as high risk: chronic pain, PTSD, substance abuse issues. People the system had already failed. People nobody would miss. Where are they now? Kim's expression darkened. We don't know. Locke's been moving them through a network of offshore facilities. Some we've tracked to Central America. Others just vanished. Lucia felt something sharp and hot coil in her chest. You've known about this for 8 months and you didn't stop him? We needed evidence that would hold up in court, Dawson said. Locke's protected by layers of shell companies, encrypted communications, and plausible deniability. Every time we got close, he shifted operations or burned the trail. We needed someone inside who could access his systems without triggering alarms. That's where you come in, Garrett said. Lucia shook her head. I'm a nurse. I don't have access to executive-level files. Or you have access to the patient database, Dawson interrupted.
You've been documenting irregularities for months. You know which records were altered, which patients disappeared, and which medications went missing. That's more intel than we've been able to gather in 8 months of surveillance. And Locke just tried to fire you, Torres added, which means he's scared. Scared people make mistakes. Lucia stared at the screen, her mind racing. You want me to go back. We want you to keep doing what you've been doing, Garrett said. Document everything, flag the patterns, give us the proof we need to dismantle his entire operation. And if he tries to get rid of me again, he won't. Garrett's voice was granted. Because as of right now, you're not just a civilian nurse. You're a reinstated military officer conducting an authorized federal investigation. If Locke touches you, he's assaulting a commissioned officer and obstructing a federal operation. Lucia's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to hide it. What about the people working with him? The doctors, the administrators? We'll handle them, Kim said. But we need the financial records and communication logs. That's what's going to put Locke away for life. Lucia looked at each of them in turn. And if I say no, then we proceed without you, Garrett said quietly. We raid the hospital, seize what evidence we can find, and hope it's enough. But Locke's lawyers will tear it apart, and most of his network will walk. He paused. People like him always do. Lucia closed her eyes. She thought about the veteran who'd vanished from the ER 3 months ago, the man who'd screamed about experiments and lost time before security dragged him away. She thought about the other patients she'd never seen again, the medications that disappeared, the records that got erased. She thought about Graham Locke's smile. When she opened her eyes, her hands were steady. I'll do it. Lucia returned to Pine Haven Memorial at 9 p.m., escorted by 2 plainclothing federal agents who disappeared into the parking lot the moment she stepped through the doors. The ER was still chaotic, but the worst of the trauma surge had passed. Most of the critical patients had been stabilized or transferred to surgery. The waiting room was packed with families demanding updates. Lucia walked straight to the nurse's station. The charge nurse looked up, her face pale.
Bennett, I thought you were... I'm back, Lucia said flatly. What do you need? The charge nurse blinked, visibly thrown. We've got 3 post-op patients who need monitoring, and Dr. Hale wants... I'll take them. Lucia didn't wait for a response. She grabbed a tablet, pulled up the patient assignments, and got to work. She moved through the ER like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just been escorted out by military police, like the entire hospital wasn't buzzing with rumors about who she really was. Dr. Hale intercepted her near the supply closet. Bennett, his voice was tight. We need to talk. I'm busy. I don't care. Hale stepped in front of her, blocking her path. What the hell is going on? Who are you? Lucia met his eyes without flinching. I'm the nurse you blamed for your mistakes this morning, remember? Hale's face flushed. That's not... I didn't know. Didn't know what? Lucia's voice was ice. That I might actually know what I'm doing? That I might have more experience than you assumed? I'm a senior physician. You can't talk to me like you're a senior physician who almost let a patient bleed out because you couldn't find medication I'd already logged. Lucia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. So here's what's going to happen, Dr. Hale. You're going to stay out of my way. You're going to stop blaming nurses for your screw-ups, and you're going to remember that rank doesn't mean if you can't do your job. She pushed past him before he could respond. Behind her, Hale stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. The charge nurse was staring, and in the corner of the ER, Sergeant Ramirez, still coordinating with the military medical team, smiled. Lucia worked through the night, documenting everything. She cross-referenced patient records with medication logs, flagged discrepancies in transfer paperwork, and quietly copied files onto an encrypted drive Agent Kim had given her. She moved carefully, making sure nobody saw what she was doing, making sure she looked like just another exhausted nurse trying to survive a double shift. At 2 a.m., she accessed Graham Locke's administrative calendar. He had a meeting scheduled for 6 a.m. in his office. No attendees listed, no agenda, just a blocked-out time slot marked private. Lucia's pulse quickened. She pulled up the security camera feed, something she technically wasn't authorized to access, but the hospital's IT security was laughable, and scrolled back through the past 3 months.
Every time Lockage had a private meeting, the same pattern emerged. Someone arrived through the loading dock entrance, they went straight to Locke's office. They left within 30 minutes, and the next day, patient records would change. Lucia took screenshots of everything and uploaded them to the secure server agent Kim had set up. Then she erased her access logs and went back to work. At 5:30 a.m., she grabbed a coffee from the break room and positioned herself near the 3rd-floor stairwell with a clear view of Locke's office door. She didn't have to wait long. At 5:50, a man in a dark suit entered through the side entrance and took the stairs to the 3rd floor. Lucia recognized him from the surveillance photos Agent Kim had shown her.
Victor Mendoza, a pharmaceutical distributor with ties to offshore medical research facilities. Locke's office door opened. Mendoza went inside. Lucia pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to Agent Kim. "He's here." The response came back instantly. "Stay clear, we're moving in." Lucia's hands were shaking again. She forced herself to walk back to the ER, to act normal, to do her job like nothing was about to explode. At 6:15 a.m., federal agents flooded Pine Haven Memorial Hospital. They came through every entrance simultaneously, armed, armored, and moving with the kind of coordinated precision that made hospital security look like mall cops. Agents and FBI windbreakers stormed the administrative wing, DEA investigators hit the pharmacy, military police secured the loading docks, and Lucia stood in the middle of the ER watching it happen. Patients screamed, families panicked, nurses scattered like startled birds. Dr. Hale grabbed Lucia's arm. "What the hell is this?" She pulled free. "Justice." On the third floor, agents kicked open Graham Locke's office door. Lockage was standing behind his desk, pale and furious, with Victor Mendoza frozen mid-sentence beside him. "You can't just barge in here," Locke snarled. "I'll have your badges for—" Agent Dawson held up a federal warrant. "Graham Lockage, you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, Medicare fraud, human experimentation, and obstruction of a federal investigation." Locke's face went white. "This is insane. I'm a hospital executive. I have lawyers." "You're going to need them." Dawson nodded to the agents behind him. "Take them." They moved fast. Lockage tried to run. He made it 3 steps before an agent tackled him to the floor and slammed cuffs around his wrists. Mendoza didn't even try. He just raised his hands and let them arrest him without a word. Lucia watched from the ER as they dragged Lockage through the lobby in handcuffs. He saw her. Their eyes met. And for the first time since she'd started working at Pine Haven Memorial, Graham Lockage looked scared. "You," he hissed, struggling against the agents holding him. "You did this. You're the one who—" "Careful, Mr. Lockage," Lucia said quietly. "You're already facing multiple federal charges. Threatening a military officer won't help your case." Locke's face twisted with rage. "You're nobody. You're just a goddamn nurse who—" "She's a decorated combat veteran who saved more lives in one night than you've helped in your entire career," Colonel Garrett said, stepping into view. He'd been standing just outside the lobby entrance, waiting. "And she just handed us enough evidence to dismantle your entire criminal network." Lockage's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Garrett nodded to the agents. "Get him out of here." They hauled Lockage toward the exit while cameras, news crews had already arrived, captured every second. The lobby was chaos. Hospital administrators were being questioned. Security guards were being detained. Doctors were demanding explanations nobody had time to give. And Lucia stood in the center of it all, exhausted and bloodstained and utterly calm. Agent Kim approached her, holding a tablet. "We found the offshore accounts. Financial records linking Locke to at least 6 unlicensed research facilities in 3 countries, patient transfer logs, experimental drug trials, everything." Lucia's throat was tight. "The patients, the ones who disappeared. Can you find them?" Kim's expression was grim. "We're working on it. But, Captain, some of them have been gone for over a year. The chances—" "Find them," Lucia said, her voice cracked. "However long it takes, find them." Kim nodded. "We will." Dawson joined them, looking exhausted but satisfied. "We've got 11 people in custody. Locke, Mendoza, 3 hospital administrators, 4 doctors, and 2 pharmaceutical suppliers. The DEA is tearing apart the supply chain as we speak." "What about the others?" Lucia asked. "The staff who didn't know, the nurses who were just doing their jobs." "They're not being charged," Dawson said. "Unless we find evidence they were actively involved, they're witnesses, not suspects." Lucia thought about the charge nurse who'd told her to drop it, the residents who'd looked the other way, the countless people who'd seen the red flags and said nothing. "They knew," she said quietly. "Maybe not the details, but they knew something was wrong." "Knowing and proving are different things," Dawson said. "We focus on the ones who orchestrated this. The rest, they'll have to live with what they didn't do." Lucia didn't respond, because she knew exactly what that felt like. The ER was finally winding down when Sergeant Ramirez found her. "Captain," he said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Lucia followed him to a quiet corner near the staff break room. Ramirez looked uncomfortable, like he was trying to figure out how to say something he'd been holding back for hours. "Ma'am,
I just wanted to say, it's good to see you again, even under these circumstances. Lucia's chest tightened. Ramirez, you saved my life, he said. Kandahar, 3 years ago, I was bleeding out in the back of a transport vehicle, and you kept me alive long enough to get to a field hospital. He paused. I heard you left the service after that deployment. I always wondered why. Lucia looked away. It was time. Respectfully, ma'am, that's... She turned back to him, startled. Ramirez met her eyes. You were one of the best combat medics I ever served with. You kept more soldiers alive under fire than anyone I've ever seen, and then you just disappeared. He hesitated. Word was you had a breakdown, that you couldn't handle it anymore. Lucia's jaw tightened. Is there a point to this, Sergeant?
Yeah. Ramirez stepped closer. The point is, whatever happened over there, whatever made you leave, it didn't break you. Because the woman I just watched save 20 people during a mass casualty event is the same woman who dragged me out of a firefight when everyone else had given up. Lucia's throat was burning. Ramirez, you don't owe me an explanation, ma'am, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know that whatever you think you lost, it's still there. I saw it tonight. He saluted, sharp, formal, respectful, and walked away before she could respond. Lucia stood alone in the hallway, her hands shaking, her vision blurring. She didn't cry. She'd stopped crying a long time ago. But she let herself feel it, the weight of everything she'd carried for 2 years, the guilt, the exhaustion, the certainty that she'd failed the people who'd needed her most. And for the first time since she'd left the military, she wondered if maybe Ramirez was right. By 8 a.m., the federal agents had cleared out, taking their suspects and evidence with them. The hospital administration was in chaos. Half the executive staff was gone. The remaining department heads were scrambling to figure out who was in charge. Lucia clocked out at 9 a.m., 18 hours after her shift had started. She walked to her car in silence, her body aching, her mind numb. She was halfway across the parking lot when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Colonel Garrett was standing 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. You did good work, Captain, he said. Lucia didn't respond. Garrett stepped closer. Your 48 hours are almost up. After that, you're free to return to civilian life. Clean record, full honors. He paused. Or you can come back. Lucia's chest constricted. Come back where? Active duty. We need medical officers with your experience. People who know how to operate in hostile environments. People who don't break under pressure. I left for a reason. I know. Garrett's voice was quiet. And I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to decide if walking away made it better. Lucia stared at him, her hands curling into fists. She thought about the soldiers she'd lost, the ones she hadn't been able to save, the nightmares that still woke her at 3 a.m. She thought about the patients who'd disappeared from Pine Haven Memorial, the ones she might never find. She thought about Ramirez's words. It's still there.
I need time, she said finally. Garrett nodded. You've got 48 hours. Think about it. He turned and walked back toward the command vehicles. Lucia stood in the parking lot alone, watching the sun rise over Coldwater Springs. Her phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at the Plaza Ruins. Come alone. Lucia's blood went cold because the message came with a photo attachment, and the photo showed one of the missing veteran patients alive, terrified, and holding today's newspaper. Lucia stared at the photo until her eyes burned. The man in the image was Thomas Bridger, the same veteran who'd vanished from the ER 3 months ago, the same one who'd been screaming about experiments before security dragged him away. He looked thinner now, hollow-eyed, with fresh bruises on his face and zip-tie marks around his wrists. The newspaper he held was today's edition. Front-page headline, Federal Raid Shuts Down Hospital Trafficking Ring. Someone had him, and someone wanted Lucia to know. She should have called Garrett immediately, should have forwarded the message to Agent Kim or Dawson, should have followed protocol and let the federal task force handle it. Instead, she got in her car and drove toward the Plaza Ruins. The Veterans Memorial Plaza was still cordoned off with police tape and federal barriers. The explosion had ripped through the center of the outdoor amphitheater, leaving a crater surrounded by shattered concrete and twisted metal. Emergency crews had cleared most of the debris, but the smell of smoke and chemical accelerants still hung in the air. Lucia parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance on foot. The morning sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the destroyed plaza. A few federal investigators were still working the scene, taking samples and documenting evidence. Nobody stopped her. She reached the edge of the blast zone and waited. Her phone buzzed again.
Northwest corner behind the memorial wall. Lucia's hand instinctively went to her waistband, where she used to carry a sidearm during deployments, but she wasn't armed, wasn't armored, wasn't prepared for whatever this was. She walked anyway. The memorial wall was a curved granite structure inscribed with the names of local veterans killed in action. The explosion had cracked it down the middle, splitting names in half. Lucia rounded the corner and found a man waiting in the shadows. He was tall, mid-40s, with the kind of weathered face that came from years spent in dangerous places. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, but he moved like military. His eyes tracked her approach with the calculating focus of someone who'd been trained to assess threats. "Captain Bennett," he said quietly. Lucia stopped 10 feet away. "Who are you?" "Someone who used to work for Graham Locke." The man's voice was rough, strained, until I realized what he was really doing. "You have proof of that?" "I have, Thomas Bridger." The man pulled out a phone and showed her another photo, Bridger tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. "And I have information about the rest of the patients Locke disappeared, but I need guarantees first." Lucia's jaw tightened. "Guarantees of what?" "Immunity, protection, a way out." The man stepped closer, his expression desperate. "Locke didn't work alone. He had partners, people with enough money and power to make federal investigations disappear. And now that he's been arrested, those people are cleaning house. Then turn yourself in, talk to the FBI. The FBI can't protect me from what's coming." The man's hands were shaking. "You don't understand how deep this goes. Locke was just the distributor. The real operation is being run by people who've been doing this for decades. Military contractors, pharmaceutical executives, politicians." Lucia felt ice spread through her chest. "If that's true, why come to me? Because you're the only person in this mess who isn't compromised." The man looked at her like she was his last lifeline. "You exposed Locke, you brought down his network, and you did it without backup, without authority, without anyone believing you." He paused. "That makes you either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Either way, it means I can trust you." "You sent me a photo of a hostage," Lucia said coldly.
That's not how you build trust. I needed to get your attention, and I needed to make sure you came alone. The man glanced over his shoulder, scanning the plaza. "Bridger's safe for now, but if I don't check in every 6 hours, the people holding him will disappear him permanently." "Where is he?" "I'll tell you. But first, I need you to listen." Lucia's hands curled into fists. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to call for backup. But if this man was telling the truth, if Locke's operation really extended beyond what the federal task force had uncovered, then going through official channels might get Bridger killed. "Talk," she said. The man exhaled slowly. Locke's pharmaceutical trafficking was never about money. It was about access. He used the hospital to source test subjects for experimental drug trials that would never pass FDA approval. Veterans with chronic pain, PTSD, addiction issues, people the system had already failed, people nobody would miss. We already know that. You know the surface. The man's voice dropped. You don't know who is funding it. A defense contractor called Meridian Solutions. They specialize in battlefield medicine and combat pharmaceuticals. They've been developing next-generation painkillers and cognitive enhancers for military use. But testing those drugs on active-duty soldiers creates paper trails, legal liabilities, congressional oversight. Lucia's stomach turned. So they used veterans instead. Disposable test subjects with pre-existing conditions who'd signed away their medical privacy rights when enlisted. The man pulled out a USB drive. "This has everything. Financial records, clinical trial data, communications between Locke and Meridian executives, proof that this operation has been running for over 5 years across multiple states." Lucia stared at the drive. "Why didn't you go to the authorities with this before?"
"Because I was part of it," the man's voice cracked. "I worked logistics for Meridian. I helped move patients between facilities. I falsified transport records. I knew what was happening, and I did it anyway because they paid me well. And I told myself it was for the greater good." He looked away. "Then I saw what happened to the patients who didn't respond to treatment. What happened to them? They got transferred to a research facility in Mexico. Officially, it's a rehab center for veterans with substance abuse issues. Unofficially, it's where Meridian sends the failures, the ones who had adverse reactions, the ones who couldn't be released back into society without raising questions." The man's hands were shaking harder. "Now, I helped send 43 people to that facility, and I haven't heard from a single one of them since." Lucia felt bile rise in her throat. "Where's Bridger?" He's being held in a storage unit on the east side of Coldwater Springs. The people watching him think they're protecting an asset. They don't know I'm here. Who are they? Private security contractors, former military. They work for Meridian, but they're loyal to money, not ideology. The man handed her a folded piece of paper. That's the address. You bring federal agents and Bridger dies. Meridian will activate their cleanup protocol, and everyone involved will scatter before you can build a case. Lucia took the paper, her mind racing. What do you want from me? Get Bridger out. Get him somewhere safe where he can testify. Use the data on that drive to take down Meridian before they erase the evidence. The man's voice was desperate. And keep me alive long enough to help you do it. Why should I trust you? Because if I wanted you dead, you'd already be bleeding out in this plaza. The man stepped back. I'll contact you again in 12 hours. If Bridger's safe by then, I'll give you everything else I have. If he's not. He didn't finish the sentence. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the maze of shattered concrete and memorial debris. Lucia stood alone in the ruins, holding a USB drive that could either expose a massive criminal conspiracy or get her killed. She pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over Garrett's contact. Then she thought about what the man had said. The FBI can't protect me from what's coming.
If Meridian Solutions really had the kind of reach he described, defense contracts, political connections, the ability to make federal investigations disappear, then going through official channels might give them time to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. But going alone was suicide. Lucia made a decision. She called Sergeant Ramirez. He answered on the second ring. "Captain, I need your help," Lucia said, "and I need you to not ask questions until this is over." There was a long pause. "Where are you?" "The plaza." "How fast can you get here?" 10 minutes. "Bring tactical gear and anyone you trust who isn't officially part of the federal task force." Another pause. "Ma'am, whatever you're planning." "Ramirez," Lucia interrupted. "Do you trust me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then move." Ramirez arrived in an unmarked SUV with 2 other soldiers, both veterans of the same combat unit Lucia had served with overseas. They pulled up to the plaza with enough gear to outfit a small tactical team. Lucia briefed them in 2 minutes, standing in the shadow of the memorial wall. Ramirez listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the address on the paper. "You know this is insane, right?" "Yes. And you're asking us to conduct an unsanctioned rescue operation on U.S. soil without federal authorization or backup?" "Yes." Ramirez looked at the other 2 soldiers. They nodded. "All right," Ramirez said. "But if this goes sideways, we're all getting court-martialed." "If this goes sideways, court-martial will be the least of our problems." They drove to the east side of Coldwater Springs in silence. The storage facility was a sprawling complex of metal units surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras. The kind of place people use to hide things they didn't want found. Ramirez pulled surveillance photos from a tablet. 3 guards visible, 2 at the main entrance, 1 mobile patrol. They're armed, but they're not expecting a fight. "How do you know?" Lucia asked. "Because they're standing around drinking coffee instead of maintaining tactical positions." Ramirez zoomed in on one of the guards. "These guys are mercenaries, not operators. They're here to babysit, not defend. That changes the moment we breach, which is why we don't breach."
Ramirez looked at her. "We run a medical emergency. You're a nurse. You show up claiming someone called 911 about a man having a heart attack in one of the units. They either let you in to check, or they refuse and admit they're holding someone against their will." Lucia considered it. "And if they refuse, then we adapt." 5 minutes later, Lucia walked up to the main entrance alone, wearing her nursing scrubs and carrying a medical bag Ramirez had pulled from the SUV. She looked exhausted, disheveled, and completely harmless. The 2 guards straightened as she approached. "Help you?" one of them asked. "I'm responding to a 911 call," Lucia said, slightly out of breath. "Someone reported a man having a medical emergency in one of these units. Chest pain, difficulty breathing. Dispatch sent me to assess before the ambulance arrives." The guards exchanged glances. "We didn't call 911, the second guard said. "I know. Someone else did. A passerby, maybe." Lucia pulled out her phone, showing a fake dispatch screen Ramirez had mocked up. "Look, I don't get paid enough to argue about this. If there's someone in distress, I need to check on them. If not, I log it as a false alarm and move on." The first guard hesitated. "Which unit?" Lucia checked the address on the paper. "Unit 47. The guards went rigid. "Nobody's in that unit," the first guard said carefully. "Then let me check and confirm that for dispatch." "Can't do that." Lucia's expression hardened. "Sir, if someone is having a cardiac event and I don't respond because you refused access, that's negligence and you'll be named in the lawsuit." The second guard pulled out a radio. "We need to call this in." That's when Ramirez moved. He came from behind the fence line, fast, silent, trained, and had the second guard on the ground before the man could finish his sentence. The first guard reached for his sidearm, but Lucia was already moving. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it sharply, and drove her knee into his solar plexus. The guard went down, gasping. The other two soldiers emerged from cover, zip-tying both guards and dragging them out of sight. Ramirez looked at Lucia. "You good?" She was breathing hard, adrenaline flooding her system. "Yeah, then let's move." They breached Unit 47 with bolt cutters and tactical precision. The interior was dark, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Thomas Bridger was tied to a metal chair in the center of the space, his head hanging forward, dried blood on his face. Lucia rushed to him. "Bridger, Thomas, can you hear me?" Bridger's eyes flickered open. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Captain Bennett, I'm here. I'm safe now. They said if I talked, they'd kill my family." Lucia cut through the zip ties binding his wrists. "Nobody's killing anyone. We're getting you out of here." Bridger's legs buckled when he tried to stand. Ramirez caught him, supporting his weight. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Then move. We've got maybe 3 minutes before someone notices their guards are down." They made it to the SUV and were pulling out of the parking lot when Lucia's phone rang. "Unknown number," she answered. "Bennett? Captain?" The voice was cold, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "You just made a very serious mistake." Lucia's blood went cold. "Who is this?" "My name is Director Anton Cross. I run operational security for Meridian Solutions, and you just kidnapped one of our research subjects." Bridger's a human being, not a research subject. Legally, he signed consent forms waiving his rights to medical privacy and experimental treatment, which means you just committed felony kidnapping and interfered with a federally licensed pharmaceutical trial.
Lucia's jaw tightened. Those consent forms were signed under duress. "Prove it." Cross's voice was like ice. "In the meantime, you're going to return Mr. Bridger to our facility, destroy whatever evidence you think you have, and walk away. Or I'll have federal warrants issued for your arrest within the hour." "You can't do that." "I absolutely can. Meridian Solutions has contracts with the Department of Defense, the FDA, and congressional oversight committees. We have more lawyers than you have brain cells, and we have enough political capital to bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." Lucia looked at Bridger, who was trembling in the back seat. "I'm not giving him back." "Then you've chosen sides, Captain, and I promise you that's a decision you're going to regret." The line went dead. Ramirez was watching her in the rearview mirror. "What did he say?" "He threatened to have me arrested if we don't return Bridger." "Can he do that?" "If he has the connections he claims, yes." Ramirez's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "So what's the play?" Lucia looked at the USB drive in her hand. "We go public right now before Meridian has time to spin this." "How?" "I know someone." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a small news station on the outskirts of Coldwater Springs. KCWS Local News wasn't a major network, but it had a reputation for investigative journalism and a reporter named Miranda Hale, who'd built a career exposing corruption. Lucia walked into the lobby with Bridger leaning on her shoulder and Ramirez flanking them. The receptionist's eyes went wide. "Ma'am, you can't just—" "I need to speak with Miranda Hale now." "She's not available."
Tell her Captain Lucia Bennett has evidence of a military pharmaceutical conspiracy involving human experimentation, federal corruption, and corporate cover-ups. And if she doesn't want every other network in the country to break this story first, she'll see me in the next 60 seconds. The receptionist grabbed her phone. Miranda Hale appeared 90 seconds later, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, wearing a blazer over a coffee-stained shirt. She looked at Lucia, then at Bridger, then at the USB drive Lucia was holding. "You're the nurse from Hospital Raid," Miranda said. "I am. And you're here because the story you covered this morning is only the beginning." Lucia handed her the USB drive. "Everything on that drive is verified, documented, and actionable. Financial records, clinical trial data, communications proving a defense contractor has been using veterans as unwilling test subjects for experimental drugs." Miranda's eyes sharpened. "That's a hell of an accusation. It's a hell of a story." Miranda looked at Bridger. "Who's he?" "Thomas Bridger, one of the victims. He can testify to everything that happened." Bridger nodded weakly.
They did things to us. Injections, procedures. We weren't patients. We were experiments." Miranda pulled out her phone and started recording. "Start from the beginning." For the next 40 minutes, Lucia and Bridger laid out everything. Locke's operation, Meridian Solutions, the offshore facilities, the missing patients. Miranda asked sharp questions, verified details, and cross-referenced the data on the USB drive against public records. By the time they finished, her hands were shaking. "This is massive," Miranda said quietly. This is Watergate-level massive. Can you run it? Lucia asked. I need to verify a few more sources, but yes, I can have something ready for the 6 o'clock broadcast. Miranda looked at her. But you understand what this means, right? The moment this goes live, you're going to have federal investigators, corporate lawyers, and probably a few congressional committees coming after you. I know. And you're still willing to do this. Lucia thought about the 43 patients sent to the facility in Mexico, the ones who'd vanished without a trace. Yes. Miranda nodded. Then let's burn this thing down. The story broke at 6 p.m., and it detonated like a bomb. Miranda Hale's broadcast opened with footage of the hospital raid, then pivoted to the documents on the USB drive. She named Meridian Solutions, named the executives, named the politicians who'd accepted campaign contributions while the company operated with impunity, and she put Thomas Bridger on camera. Bridger sat in a chair, his face bruised and exhausted, and told the world what had been done to him. They told me it was treatment, he said, his voice breaking. They told me the drugs would help with the pain, but they didn't care about helping. They just wanted to see what would happen when they pushed us past our limits. The broadcast went viral within minutes. National networks picked it up. Social media exploded. Congressional offices started issuing statements, and the federal task force, the same one that had arrested Graham Locke that morning, suddenly found itself scrambling to address a scandal that had just expanded exponentially.
Lucia watched the broadcast from Ramirez's apartment, sitting on the couch with Bridger beside her. The man was shaking, tears streaming down his face. They're gonna come after me, he whispered. Let them try, Lucia said quietly. Her phone rang. It was Garrett. She answered. Colonel, what the hell did you just do? Garrett's voice was furious. You conducted an unsanctioned rescue operation, leaked classified information to the press, and just painted a target on your back the size of Texas. I did my job. Your job was to assist the federal investigation, not turn this into a media circus. The federal investigation was focused on Locke, Lucia said. It wasn't going to touch Meridian, and you know it. There was a long silence. You're right, Garrett said finally, which is why I'm not arresting you. But Lucia, you need to understand what you've just started. Meridian Solutions has billions of dollars in defense contracts. They have senators on speed dial. They're going to come after you with everything they have. Then I'll deal with it. You can't deal with this alone. I'm not alone. Lucia looked at Ramirez, who nodded. I've got people who believe in doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Garrett exhaled slowly. All right, but you're going to need protection. Official protection. I'm assigning a security detail to you effective immediately. I don't need... That's not a request, Captain. You just declared war on one of the most powerful corporations in the country. They will try to silence you, and I'm not letting that happen. The line went dead. Lucia sat in the quiet apartment, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. Bridger looked at her. What happens now? Now we wait, Lucia said, and we see who comes looking for a fight. The answer came at 3 a.m. Lucia woke to the sound of breaking glass. She rolled off the couch, instincts kicking in before her brain fully processed what was happening. Ramirez was already moving, grabbing a sidearm from the lockbacks near the door. Stay down, he hissed.
3 figures in tactical gear crashed through the apartment window. They moved fast, trained, professional, silent. Not police, not federal agents. Meridian's cleanup crew. Ramirez fired twice. One of the intruders went down. The other 2 scattered, returning fire. Bullets tore through the apartment, shattering furniture and punching holes in the walls. Lucia grabbed Bridger and dragged him into the bathroom, slamming the door and locking it. She could hear gunfire, shouting, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Then silence. Footsteps approached the bathroom door. Lucia pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. The door exploded inward. A masked figure stood in the doorway, weapon raised. Lucia didn't hesitate. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with everything she had. The metal canister connected with the intruder's head, and the man went down hard. Ramirez appeared behind him, blood on his face, weapon still raised. You good? Yeah, we need to move now. They ran out of the apartment, down the fire escape, into the street, where Ramirez's SUV was waiting. The other 2 soldiers were already inside, engines running. They drove through Coldwater Springs at breakneck speed, sirens wailing in the distance behind them. Lucia's phone buzzed. A message from Director Cross.
You should have taken the deal. And below it, another photo. This one showed the research facility in Mexico, and it was on fire. The facility in Mexico was burning so hot, the satellite imagery showed it as a white-hot bloom against the desert landscape. Lucia stared at the photo on her phone, while Ramirez's SUV tore through Coldwater Springs at 80 miles per hour, sirens still wailing somewhere behind them. "They're destroying evidence," Bridger surfed from the back seat, his voice hollow. "Everyone who was still in there, they're all gone." Lucia's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles went white. She thought about the 43 patients the informant had mentioned, the ones sent to Mexico because they'd failed the trials, the ones who couldn't be released without raising questions. Cross had just erased them all. "We need to get to a federal facility," Ramirez said, eyes locked on the rearview mirror. "Somewhere with enough security that Meridian can't reach us." "They reached us in your apartment," Lucia said. "They'll reach us anywhere." "Then what's the play?" Lucia's mind was racing through options, discarding each one as fast as it formed. Running wouldn't work. Hiding wouldn't work. Meridian had the resources to hunt them across state lines, and Cross had already proven he was willing to kill to protect the company's interests. The only way forward was straight through. "We go to Washington." Ramirez nearly swerved off the road. "What?" "Meridian's power comes from defense contracts and political connections. If we can get someone in Congress to launch an official investigation before Cross finishes his cleanup, we might survive this." "Might?" "It's better than the alternative." One of the soldiers in the back, Corporal Diaz, leaned forward. "Ma'am, with respect, we just got shot at by private military contractors. Getting on a plane to D.C. seems like a good way to get shot again." "Then we drive," Lucia said. "Straight through. No stops except fuel. We rotate drivers and keep moving until we're standing in front of someone who can't be bought." Ramirez looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "That's a 40-hour drive. You got somewhere better to be?"
Nobody answered. They drove east through Nevada into Utah, across Colorado in the dead of night. They stopped only for gas and bathroom breaks, paying cash and avoiding security cameras. Bridger slept fitfully in the back seat, jerking awake every time headlights appeared behind them. Lucia stayed awake, watching the highway scroll past, her mind churning through everything that had happened. Somewhere around Denver, her phone rang. Not Cross this time. "Miranda Hale," Lucia answered. "Tell me you've got something." "More than something," Miranda said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "After your story broke, we've been flooded with tips. Former Meridian employees, whistleblowers, people who've been sitting on evidence for years because they were too scared to come forward." She paused. "Lucia, this company has been running illegal drug trials on veterans for almost a decade, and the FDA knew about it." Lucia's stomach dropped. "What?" "We've got internal emails from FDA officials discussing Meridian's trials. They flagged multiple violations, patient consent issues, adverse reaction cover-ups, falsified safety data, but every time someone tried to shut it down, the investigation got killed from above. Political pressure, campaign contributions, threats of budget cuts. Who killed the investigations?" "That's what I'm still trying to confirm, but the names that keep appearing are all connected to the Senate Armed Services Committee, the same committee that approves Meridian's defense contracts." Lucia felt something cold settled in her chest. They knew the entire time. They knew what Meridian was doing, and they let it continue, because shutting it down would have jeopardized military contracts. "That's what the evidence suggests," Miranda said. "But here's the problem. I can't run this story without confirmation from someone inside the government. If I accuse sitting senators of corruption without ironclad proof, they'll sue us into oblivion and bury the whole thing. What do you need?" "I need someone on the Armed Services Committee to go on record, someone willing to admit they knew about the violations and did nothing." Lucia thought about the politicians who'd built careers on military support, the ones who gave speeches about supporting veterans while voting to defund VA hospitals and protect defense contractors. "I know someone," she said quietly, "or I used to." Senator Patricia Vance had represented Nevada for 12 years. She'd built her reputation on military advocacy, veteran benefits, and holding defense contractors accountable. She'd also been one of the loudest voices calling for investigations into pharmaceutical corruption. She was also the person who'd written Lucia's letters of recommendation when she'd applied to nursing school after leaving the military. Lucia hadn't spoken to her in 2 years.
She made the call from a truck stop somewhere in Kansas, standing in the cold parking lot while diesel engines rumbled around her. Vance answered on the fourth ring. "This is Senator Vance." "Senator, it's Lucia Bennett." There was a long pause. "Lucia, I saw the news reports, the hospital raid, the story about Meridian Solutions." Vance's voice was careful, measured. "I was hoping you'd call. I need your help. I assumed you would." Vance exhaled slowly. "Where are you right now?" "On the road heading to Washington." "Why?" "Because Meridian just tried to kill me, and they destroyed evidence by burning down a research facility in Mexico with patients still inside. And I have proof that federal regulators knew about their illegal trials and buried the investigations." Another long pause. "Lucia, what you're describing is complicated." "It's not complicated. It's criminal." "I agree. But going after a company with Meridian's connections requires building an airtight case. If we move too fast, they'll use their political capital to shut us down before we can get traction."
Lucia's jaw tightened. "How long have you known?" "Known what?" "About Meridian, about the trials, about the FDA cover-ups." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Senator Lucia said, quietly, "How long?" 3 years, Vance said finally. "I received classified briefings about irregularities in Meridian's operations. But every time I tried to push for deeper investigations, I was told it would compromise national security, that the drugs they were developing were critical to military readiness, that shutting them down would put soldiers at risk." "So you did nothing." "I did what I could within the system. I pushed for oversight committees. I demanded transparency reports. You let them keep operating," Lucia interrupted. "You knew they were using veterans as test subjects, and you let it continue because shutting them down was politically inconvenient." "That's not fair." "Fair." Lucia's voice cracked. "Do you know how many people have vanished into Meridian's system? How many veterans were experimented on without consent? How many died in that facility? Cross just burned to the ground." "I know," Vance said, and for the first time her voice broke. "I know, Lucia. And I've been trying to find a way to stop them without destroying my ability to help anyone else. But if I'd gone public 3 years ago, I would have lost my seat, lost my committee positions, lost any leverage I had to push for reforms. So instead, you protected your career while people suffered. I protected my ability to make change within the system. The system is broken," Lucia said, "and you know it." There was another long silence. "What do you need from me?" Vance asked finally. "Go on record. Admit what you knew and when you knew it. Give Miranda Hale the confirmation she needs to run the story about FDA corruption and political cover-ups. If I do that, I'll be finished. My colleagues will turn on me. The party will disown me. I'll lose everything. Then lose it," Lucia said. "Because right now, you're choosing between your career and your conscience, and I need to know which one matters more." Vance didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Send me the reporter's contact information. I'll give her what she needs." Lucia felt something loose in her chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Vance said. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. Meridian has allies in places you haven't even considered. And Cross isn't going to stop until you're silenced. Let him try."
Lucia, I'm done running, Senator. I'm done being quiet, and I'm done watching people like Cross operate with impunity while veterans die in the shadows. Lucia's voice was still, so either help me bring them down or get out of the way. She hung up before Vance could respond. Ramirez was leaning against the SUV, arms crossed. "How'd that go?" "She's going to talk." "Good, because we've got company." Lucia turned and saw 2 black sedans pulling into the truck stop parking lot. They moved with a deliberate precision of vehicles that weren't there by accident. "How long?" Lucia asked. "They've been following us since Colorado. I was hoping they'd break off, but..." Ramirez pulled his sidearm and checked the magazine. "They're committed." Lucia looked at Bridger, who was still in the back seat, pale and shaking. "We can't keep running with him in the car. He's barely holding it together. Then we need to end this now." Diaz stepped out of the vehicle, scanning the parking lot. "There's a sheriff's station 2 miles east. If we can make it there, they'll follow us and turn it into a hostage situation." Lucia said, "No, we handle this here." "Ma'am, we're outnumbered and outgunned. We're also in a public place with witnesses and security cameras. Meridian's contractors might be willing to kill us in private, but they can't risk a shootout in front of civilians." Ramirez looked skeptical. "You sure about that?" "No, but it's the only play we've got." The sedans parked 30 feet away. 4 men in civilian clothes stepped out, all of them moving like operators, all of them scanning the parking lot with the kind of awareness that came from years of tactical training. Lucia walked toward them. "Captain, what are you doing?" Ramirez hissed. "Making them commit." She stopped 10 feet from the lead contractor, a man in his 40s with a shaved head and cold eyes. "You're making this too obvious. 4 armed men following a nurse across state lines. Even the truckers are starting to notice." The contractor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Captain Bennett, Director Cross would like to speak with you." "Tell Cross I'm busy." "It's not a request." "Then it's going to be a problem." The contractor's hand moved toward his jacket. Lucia tensed, ready to move. "FBI, hands where we can see them." The shout came from across the parking lot. Lucia turned and saw Agent Dawson stepping out of an unmarked vehicle, flanked by 4 other federal agents.
All of them had weapons drawn. The contractors froze. Dawson walked toward them, his expression grim. "Gentlemen, you're currently engaged in interstate stalking and intimidation of a federal witness. I suggest you get back in your vehicles and leave before I add weapons charges to the list." The lead contractor stared at him. "We're not breaking any laws. You've carrying concealed weapons without permits in 3 states. You've been following Captain Bennett for over 600 meters, and you just threatened her in front of multiple witnesses." Dawson stepped closer. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away, or I'm going to arrest all of you and let Meridian's lawyers figure out how to explain why their security team was trying to intimidate a decorated combat veteran." The contractors didn't move. For a moment, Lucia thought they were going to escalate. Then the lead contractor stepped back. "We'll be seeing you, Captain. I'm counting on it." The contractors got back in their sedans and drove away. Dawson holstered his weapon and turned to Lucia. "You've got a real talent for making enemies. It's a gift." Lucia looked at him. "How did you find us?" "Colonel Garrett's been tracking your phone since you left Nevada. When he saw Meridian contractors tailing you, he called me." Dawson's expression softened slightly. "You should have contacted us the moment Cross threatened you." "I did contact you. I went to Miranda Hale, who's a reporter, not a federal agent. She's also someone I could trust not to bury the story." Dawson's jaw tightened. "You think we would have buried it? I think you would have tried to build a case through official channels while Meridian destroyed evidence and killed witnesses." Lucia met his eyes. "And I think you know I'm right." Dawson didn't argue. "Get in the vehicle. We're taking you to a secure location. I'm going to Washington. Not without protection. You're not. Then come with me." 3 days later, Lucia stood in a hearing room in the Rayburn House office building, facing the House Committee on Oversight and Reform.
The room was packed with journalists, congressional staffers, and spectators who'd lined up hours before the doors opened. Senator Patricia Vance had gone on record the day before admitting she'd known about Meridian's violations and failed to act. Her confession had detonated across national media, triggering calls for investigations, resignations, and criminal charges. Now it was Lucia's turn to testify. The committee chairman, a gay-haired congressman from Ohio, called the hearing to order. "Captain Bennett, thank you for appearing before this committee. We understand you have information regarding illegal pharmaceutical trials conducted by Meridian Solutions on veteran patients." "I do," Lucia said. "Please proceed." Lucia took a breath and began. She described everything. Pine Hayden Memorial, Graham Locke's trafficking operation, the veterans who'd vanished, the medications that disappeared, the research facility in Mexico that Cross had burned to destroy evidence. She presented the financial records, the clinical trial data, the communications between Meridian executives and federal regulators. She named names. By the time she finished, the hearing room was silent. The chairman leaned forward. "Captain Bennett, what you're describing constitutes one of the most egregious violations of medical ethics and human rights in modern American history. Are you prepared to stand by this testimony under oath?" "I am." "And you understand that Meridian Solutions will likely pursue legal action against you for defamation?" "Let them try." One of the committee members, a congresswoman from California, spoke up. "Captain, you've presented compelling evidence of criminal activity, but Meridian Solutions maintains that all their trials were conducted with proper consent and oversight. How do you respond to that claim?" "I'd ask them to produce the consent forms signed by Thomas Bridger and the other patients who've testified. I'd ask them to explain why their clinical trial data shows adverse reaction rates 3 times higher than what they reported to the FDA.
and I'd ask them to explain why they burned down a research facility the same day their operation was exposed.
The congresswoman nodded slowly. Thank you, Captain. Another congressman, this one from Texas, leaned into his microphone. Captain Bennett, you're aware that Meridian Solutions employs over 15,000 people and provides critical pharmaceutical support to our military. Shutting them down could compromise national security. What would you say to those concerns? Lucia looked him dead in the eye. I'd say that any company willing to experiment on veterans without consent doesn't deserve to exist, and I'd say that national security means nothing if we're willing to sacrifice the people who defend it. The congressman sat back, his face flushed. The chairman cleared his throat. This committee will now hear testimony from Director Anton Cross of Meridian Solutions. Cross entered the hearing room flanked by lawyers. He was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of calm confidence that came from decades of operating in spaces where he held all the power. He sat down, adjusted his microphone, and smiled. Thank you for the opportunity to address these serious allegations, Cross began. I want to state clearly that Meridian Solutions has always operated within the bounds of federal regulations and medical ethics standards. The claims made by Captain Bennett are based on incomplete information and a fundamental misunderstanding of how pharmaceutical trials operate. The patients who participated in our programs did so voluntarily and were informed of all risks. Cross's voice was smooth, practiced. As for the facility in Mexico, that fire was caused by an electrical malfunction. It's a tragedy, but it was not an intentional act. Do you have evidence of that electrical malfunction? The California Congresswoman asked. We have preliminary investigative reports from Mexican authorities, yes. Can you provide those reports to this committee? Cross hesitated. We're still working with local officials to finalize the documentation. In other words, no. Cross's smile tightened. We're cooperating fully with all investigations. Lucia's phone buzzed. A message from Miranda Hale. Check your email now.
Lucia pulled out her phone under the table and opened her email. Miranda had sent her a video file with a single line of text. This just came in from a whistleblower. You need to see it. Lucia opened the video. It was security camera footage from inside the Mexico facility, time-stamped 2 hours before the fire started. The footage showed Cross himself walking through the corridors with 2 men carrying accelerant canisters. Lucia's heart stopped. She looked up at Cross, who was still testifying, still lying with the kind of casual confidence that came from never being held accountable. She stood up. Captain Bennett, the chairman said, startled. You're not currently. I have new evidence, Lucia said, her voice cutting through the room. The entire hearing room went silent. Cross turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. Lucia held up her phone. This is security footage from the Mexico facility, time-stamped 12 hours ago. It shows Director Cross personally overseeing the placement of accelerants throughout the building 2 hours before the fire started. The room erupted. Cross's lawyers immediately started objecting, demanding to see the footage, claiming it was inadmissible. But the chairman was already calling for order. Captain Bennett, can you transmit that footage to the committee? Already done. The video played on the screens throughout the hearing room, and everyone watched Anton Cross commit arson and murder in high definition. Cross stood up, his face pale. That footage is fabricated. It's time-stamped and verified, Lucia said, and it came from your own security system. Cross's lawyers were pulling him toward the exit. The chairman was shouting for security, and Lucia stood in the center of the chaos, watching the man who tried to have her killed get dragged out of the hearing room in handcuffs. The arrests happened fast. Cross was charged with arson, murder, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. 3 Meridian executives were taken into custody within hours. 6 senators and 4 FDA officials were named in federal corruption investigations. Graham Lokach, still in custody from the hospital raid, agreed to testify against Meridian in exchange for a reduced sentence, and the entire pharmaceutical trafficking network collapsed. Lucia watched it happen from a hotel room in Washington, exhausted and numb. Ramirez sat across from her, equally drained. You did it, he said quietly. Lucia shook her head. We did it. No, ma'am, this was you. Ramirez leaned forward. You took on a multi-billion-dollar corporation, exposed federal corruption, and brought down everyone who tried to stop you. That's not a team effort. That's you refusing to quit. Lucia looked at him, her throat tight. People still died. The patients in Mexico. The ones we couldn't save.
and hundreds more will live because of what you exposed. Ramirez's voice was firm. You can't save everyone, Captain, but you saved the ones you could, and you made sure the people responsible will never hurt anyone again. Lucia's hands were shaking. She'd spent 2 years trying to walk away from the military, trying to convince herself she was done fighting battles that cost more than they gave. But sitting in that hotel room, looking at the news coverage of Cross being arrested, she realized something. She'd never stopped being a soldier. She'd just been fighting a different war. Her phone rang. Colonel Garrett, she answered. Sir. Captain Bennett, I wanted to inform you that the Department of Defense has officially reopened your service record. You're being recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross for actions during the Coldwater Springs attack and the subsequent investigation.